Dr. Thomas Phillips, lecturer in law at Liverpool John Moore University. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for your accepting this interview today.
It's okay. Thank you for having me again.
Thank you. So you are one of the leading signatories that have started signature campaign that calls EU to delist the PKK from terrorist organizations list. Could you
Mm.
please tell us a little more about this campaign and what is the importance of this campaign? Also, can you please tell us what is the importance of the delisting the PKK from terrorist organizations list? Of the EU terrorist organizations list, as you remember the Brussels High Court decision as well. What is your general evaluation of this campaign, first of all?
I think the campaign to gather signatories to remove the PKK from the list of proscribed terrorist organizations is a very important one for a number of reasons. And I think we can perhaps break it down briefly into three main reasons why it's important. The first reason is that it's been necessary now for a long time for the Turkish state and for interested interlocutors like the European Union to really begin to engage seriously with the legitimate demands of the Kurdish community, which are very well known. Demands such as the right to self-determination, to some sort of political governance of their own, the right to use their own language in schools, for something to be done about the economic underdevelopment in the Kurdistan regions. That has to be the overwhelming priority in all of this. And to say that one side in this struggle, namely the Kurdish side and the PKK side, is automatically illegitimate because it has the terrorist label slapped over the front of it, only serves really to legitimize Turkey's ongoing failure to begin to engage with those legitimate demands that the Kurdish community has. So if the European Union was to say to Turkey, look, we're not going to play this game anymore, we're not going to allow you to use the terrorism label and to securitize the entire issue, that in itself would be a major catalyst to some important reforms. Secondly, I know from my own experience being involved with the Kurdish community here in England, the terrorist label that's attached to the PKK is not only used against members of the PKK, it's also, as you know, used against members of the Kurdish community in their entirety. So when you go on protests and things like this, there's always a risk that the police become heavy-handed and become overly involved because of the whole terrorism label and the terrorism issue. And I think the third major issue is that it strikes me as an unfair label to use because you have two sides in this conflict, right? The Turkish state, and then you have the Kurdish side, mainly the PKK in Turkey. If you have a look objectively at the crimes that are committed by the Turkish state in the Kurdistan region, and that have been committed there for a very long time, you find that there really is no comparison between the violence that's used by each side. And the violence used by Turkey is far greater proportions to anything that has ever been done by the PKK. So that's the third reason. Fourthly, I just think we need to be objective and impartial when we're judging any organization, particularly an organization that has the ability to use military force. There are some very good things about the PKK, its ideas about democratic autonomy, about women's rights and minority rights. We should be able to have an impartial, objective discussion about the merits of those particular aspects of the PKK's ideology. And the only thing that happens when you use the terrorist label is you make that much more difficult to have that conversation because you've always got the terrorist label hanging over you. So for a number of reasons, I think it's important to move away from the terrorism and security paradigm and onto a more peaceful solution to the Kurdish question.
Thank you. You have mentioned labeling strategy as well. So it's something related with that. How would you comment on to the relation between keeping PKK on terrorist organizations list and isolation of the Kurdish leader, Mr. Abdullah Öcalan?
Yeah, well, that's part and parcel, I think, of the same problem, because if you have a look at the history of Mr. Öcalan's thought, and if you have a look at the way that he has conducted himself and behaved throughout his period of putative leadership of the PKK, there's really no way of questioning that if there is to be a solution to the Kurdish question, it's going to run through the island, the prison island of Imrali. It's going to run through Mr. Ocalan. There's no way that anyone serious can really question that that's the case. So having the PKK as an organization on the terrorist list and having Mr. Ocalan isolated on a prison island is part and parcel of the same problem. What we're doing is we're securitizing the whole issue. We're playing into that terrorism label, when what we really should be doing, or what Turkey really should be doing, is engaging with Mr. Ocalan and his legitimate grievances and his ideas for resolving this problem, engaging with him in negotiations, as has happened in the past. A few years ago, there was what could have been a fruitful discussion and a negotiation going on. Those things really urgently need to be returned to. And to say the whole thing is a matter of security and violence and terrorism is a very big distraction from these important things.
Lastly, as you know, the campaign is growing. Over 1,000 signatories signed the campaign now. So, what is your call to the international institutions, EU, UN, and USA, about delisting the PKK? Why these powers should act immediately to delist the PKK from the terrorist organizations list?
Firstly, of course, these organizations, the European Union, the United Nations, and also states such as the United States and the United Kingdom, of course, act out of self-interest. And in the case of the UK and the US, have a long imperialist history that still goes on. So, of course, their concern primarily is to have good relations with Turkey, which has a relatively strong economy. They have security arrangements with them and things of that nature. So that, I'm sure, is what their primary goal is. And in Turkey's case as well, of course, for the European Union, they want to see refugees kept away from Europe's borders and kept in Turkey, no matter what situation those refugees live in. However, even bearing in mind the realpolitik of all of these things, I would urge that it's in their best interests to have a relationship with a much more stable and a much more democratic Turkey, rather than the Turkey that we're seeing now under Mr. Erdogan, which seems to me to be in some kind of a death spiral. And one important way that they could help to make Turkey more democratic and more secure and more prosperous is to urge actors in Turkey, like the ruling party, to begin to take the Kurdish question seriously and to begin to face up to the grave injustices that have been inflicted on the Kurds in Turkey. And one small thing that might be done in order to catalyze that peaceful process is to move away, as I say, from this paradigm of terrorism and security. So that would be what I would urge upon the European Union, the UN, and all these other organizations and states.
Dr. Thomas Phillips, lecturer in law at Liverpool John Moore University. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for your valuable comments today.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure.
Thank you.